Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, we have Dr. Alan K. Davis back on the show. Last week, Dr. Davis spoke with us about the science of psychedelics, and today, Dr. Davis is back to talk with us about the clinical practice and applications of psychedelics. So welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
So let's dig into what the research actually looks like. Can you walk me through what the experience of someone going through your clinical study would do and how that would look for them?
Sure. So it is certainly an extensive process, as you might imagine, to get enrolled in for any clinical trial, but certainly for a clinical trial that is administering a Schedule I substance, meaning that the hurdles required even to just conduct the study are enormous, not only financially and from a time-consuming standpoint, but both FDA and the DEA, as well as the institutional IRB, all have to agree and be on the same page before it ever gets started. But because of that, that means that every single person that eventually enrolls in the study has to go through an extensive screening process in order to have them both meet criteria, meaning that, if we're doing a study for people with depression, we have to make sure they have depression, and we have to make sure they don't have any other things that might get in the way of us treating the depression, which is a kind of a thing in itself, trying to find someone who only has one kind of problem. Mm-hmm. And then also we have to do an extensive exclusion of different things. So the current study that we have going on right now for depression, we also have a neuroimaging component. And so they both get a brain scan before the treatment and after the treatment. And so there's a number of things that might exclude someone for that purpose. So we go through that whole process, which is including the time in person is anywhere between 10 and 12 hours of time with a person, both them filling out, questionnaires online for us, and then coming in for full day assessments, medical assessments, clinical psychology assessment, psychiatry assessment, cognitive assessment. And then at the end of that entire process, if they qualify and if they choose to enroll in the study, then they can proceed on. And depending on the study, there may be a wait list control. If they get randomized to that, that means that they have to wait a little bit before they can actually start the intervention. Some studies, people can enroll and they get randomized to different types of drug condition. There might be a placebo condition, there might be an active condition. So the timeline can differ depending on the study. For our current depression study, people who come in would either get randomized to a delay, meaning they have to wait 8 weeks before they can start treatment with us, or they can get randomized to immediate, which means they get to start the treatment right away. And at that point, they start engaging either right away or when they finally start the intervention, they have about 8 hours of psychotherapy with 2 therapists. Usually one of the therapists is either a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a clinical social worker. And then the second guide or the second professional is sometimes also one of those professionals, and sometimes it's a research assistant with a little bit of clinical training. Mm. And so at least one of the providers is, a licensed clinically trained individual. And then we spend about 8 hours with the person, getting them ready for their psilocybin session. So some of that time is spent really talking about the logistics of psilocybin, talking about what are some of the effects that they might have, how to navigate those effects, what the kind of role is of the guides, the therapist guides, what is our job there that day for them. We do kind of like a dry run through of having them kind of get into the position of the day, which for psilocybin is usually on a couch in a very lovely room where there's art on the walls and, floor rugs and comfy chairs and music and speakers and books, and looks very living room-like. And in that room with the therapist, the day is pretty much spent with headphones on, with a track of music playing the entire day, with blindfolds on, and then with a therapist there to help them. So we spend a little bit of time preparing them for that, because that, we want them to, as much as possible, be able to predict and expect what the physical environment is going to be like that day, so they feel safe. One of the biggest factors to ensuring a positive experience is what we call set and setting, which means helping prepare the person psychologically for what they're going to experience as best we can, at least give them some understanding of the territory of a psychedelic experience, and then the setting where it takes place, making sure that the physical space is comfortable and supportive of having people have, experience where they may feel very different on that day. And so we spend those 8 hours in prep really preparing the person for that. And then they have a psilocybin session. Both professionals are there with them the entire day. And there's some talking, both to kind of get them ready for the session that morning when they come in. And then we have the dose of psilocybin that they take. And then we kind of are there together, all three people, the volunteer taking the psilocybin and their guides. And then we have a series of psychotherapy sessions that happen after that, both in the morning after, a week after that, and then there's a second psilocybin day at a higher dose. And so following that, they then engage in therapy a little bit more after that as well. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of...
So during the day that they're there, are they just laying on the couch, and do they talk throughout, or is there... Basically, they're having their experience and you're just there to kind of monitor and make sure?
It depends. I mean, our general framework is that the default position for the individual is to have an inward experience. So the best we can, we prepare them for spending at least the first several hours, somewhere between 4 and 5 hours or so, that time should be an inward time, that that's why we have the blindfold and the headphones. However, there are some people who have experiences where they are externalizing some of that. They're talking, or they're moving, or their body's moving, or they're asking for support and help. There is, a time at the beginning of these experiences, for some people, where they get anxious or nervous or fearful of what's happening. And so we're there for them in that moment. If they need to have some physical support, we will hold their hand and kind of be there to kind of help physically ground them in the experience. We can also talk to them a little bit about that and help them work with and go into the experience a little more easily. So certainly that happens with some people. Some people are also perfectly great on their own that entire day, and they just lie there, they're still, and they're having, at the end of the day, we discover they've had all of these huge, big experiences, but on the outside, it looks like they were just lying there the entire time. And then we've had the opposite. We've had people who are moving, and hands are flailing, and body is twitching, and there's groaning, and there's laughter, and all the things in between. So it can look very different and for different people. And so, we kind of have our guidelines of wanting to make sure people are safe. And so we have certain guidelines about, what we can allow and what we need to make sure that, people do. For example, if someone wants to get off the couch, they have to have support of the guides. We have to be there with them to help them because they can feel disoriented. If they need to use the bathroom, we need to make sure that they're safe, walking to the bathroom, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But other than that, if they're on the couch, and they can move as much as they need to, our guidelines for them are to go with it, go with your body, trust your mind, trust yourself, that this experience will unfold in the way that it's meant to unfold for you on this day. And whatever we can do to help you go deeper, go into it, explore, be curious, be open, trust, let go, dive in. We use all of these metaphors to help them understand that the way through this experience is to go into it, not to try to avoid it or go around. Now, what's interesting is that that's exactly the same advice I give to people in their day-to-day life when they have.
I'm like, where do I sign up for this psilocybin experience?
Right. So yeah, that's a little bit about that.
And what do they, when they come out, what do they say? I mean, I'm sure that there's not one universe. I know there's universal descriptions that people have, but what do they typically say? Like, what are they seeing? What are they experiencing? What does it look like?
I wish there was a typical, like what I've noticed in my own experience, and I'm certainly not, there's certainly people who have a lot more experience than I do in this work. One of them, Mary Casamano, who's been at Hopkins for 20 years, she's done something over like 400 of these sessions with people on a variety of different studies, was part of the original studies that got started back again at Hopkins in the early 2000s. She probably could have an answer to that about the typical. My experience is that it's atypical, meaning for me, most people are having such varied and different experiences that it's all over the place. There certainly are some themes about, if someone starts talking about love or connection, and not everyone does, but if they start talking about that, there is some kind of similarities. I mean, people will, if they had a mystical experience, then they will kind of start to use words about feeling connected or feeling awe or being kind of immersed in a space that feels very comfortable. But not everybody has that experience. In fact, in our depression study, a lot of people are, maybe even most, aren't having that kind of experience. They're having other kinds of experiences, like they're getting insight into themselves. They're gaining new understanding and awareness of, their personal experiences in life or their relationships or the things that are getting in the way, the problems that they're having that are kind of co-creating a space that is conducive to depression, meaning that they're getting insight into things they need to change in their environment to help them, get out of this depressed state. And then we have people who don't have either of those, who just have challenging experiences. We've had people who've, spent the entire day feeling terrified or anxious, or we've had one person who, their experience was of being buried alive the entire first couple hours. They felt like they were spending the whole time with hands pushing them underground. And, interestingly, the backstory to that individual is that they had been chronically suicidal and depressed coming into the study, and also very socially anxious. And their experience in that session of being buried alive, they said they just relented and said, okay, fine, I'm just going to die. I'm just going to be buried. I'm just going to live under the dirt in this experience. And the minute they did that, the minute they said they just relented to being dead or buried alive, their entire awareness shifted such that they realized that all of the hands that were burying them in this psilocybin experience were their own. That they were empowered to realize that it was something they were doing to themselves. And the minute that happened, they rose up from the ground in this experience and were completely alleviated of that. And then the experience kind of shifted and went into a whole different direction. What amazing is we just saw this person a couple months ago for a 6-month follow-up or something, and their suicidality has been gone ever since that day. And this was someone who was chronically suicidal for about 10 years before psilocybin. So it's amazing. I mean, and there's some times where the experience is so clearly psychotherapeutic in that way, where it's like...
Right, just the actual experience in
exactly
is therapeutic.
Is therapeutic. And there's some times where it makes much less sense to people, and yet they also might still have a benefit. They might still feel less depressed, even though they don't really know why. It doesn't necessarily always make that clear of a connection to make sense to people. And there are certainly some people who don't respond, meaning that not everyone in the study is getting better. So, we have, with every bit of media that gets out there about this being a magic bullet, I always want to add to that it can be a magic bullet for some people, but it's not the end-all be-all answer for everyone. And there certainly are people in our study who don't necessarily have an antidepressant response to this experience.
So with these mystical experiences that you see, have there been comparisons to people who have described or who have had past life regressions or who have had near-death experiences? Is there similarities, or do people ever in these, in their, I don't want to call them a trip, what are they called?
I feel like
that's not
clinical. Use that word. Yeah, we use journey or session or...
Okay.
But journey is, probably.
I like journey. In their journey, Do they ever say, like, you mean the buried alive thing was interesting. Do they ever say, I remembered when I was it seemed like, I don't know if clinically you would use the term past life, but it seemed like I had the experience of being a slave in Egypt, or I don't know, I don't know, a Holocaust survivor, or, some experience where they referred back to a period of time where they could describe in great detail what had happened to them. Do you see anything like that?
So I have not personally seen it described in that way. There's certainly a lot of people who have experiences that are clearly not of their own life experience, right? Like, for example, one person, had an experience of being this like fox deity, where they kind of were this deity of this like fox civilization, and they kind of looked like a fox but were kind of like the head fox, right? So like, is that a past life? Maybe. I mean, if you kind of think about it from a perspective of reincarnation, then people, from that perspective would say you can be reincarnated as anything, not just form. And so maybe that's what it is. Now, they didn't interpret it that way. They just interpreted it as this like fun experience of being this like fox deity. So I haven't had anybody that's like said it in those words. Now, but the words that we have heard are more things like near-death experiences. And there is some scientific evidence that came out of London from Imperial College, where there's another big psychedelic research team, where they were comparing or looking at kind of near-death experiences that happened within and comparing that to kind of classic psychedelic experiences, and showing that there is overlap between, kind of the report, the kind of the way in which that's described, that is similar to psychedelics. And we certainly have had some people who felt that they had died. In fact, one of the things that we do to prepare people for these experiences is we talk about, if you feel like you're dying, if you feel like you're dissolving, if you feel like you're melting away, if you feel like you're obliterating into, 1,000 pieces, like, go with it. Like, let yourself die, let yourself melt, let yourself dissolve, because that process could be opening up a different type of experience. And it may be a mystical one, it may be something else, but we want people to let themselves go deeper into whatever experience is coming up. And so yes, I don't know exactly, my empirical mind wants evidence to understand these things. And I don't know that we have enough evidence yet to know exactly how all these things overlap in near-death experience, past life, awareness, all of these different things. But certainly there's something that overlaps among all of them. Nothing else overlapping in terminology and how we're processing them as humans and how we're making sense of it.
And how people describe them. They're so similar when you listen to a description. And I think when you listen to a description of someone's near-death experience, typically the ineffability is a big piece of it. But just the way it shifts and changes people's lives is so similar. Obviously, we can't necessarily create near-death experiences in that way, but it sounds like in some ways,
but it would probably be unethical.
And we're not guaranteed that someone's coming back from that one.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say also there's a lot of overlap between paranormal phenomena and things like encountering entities in the natural environment, alien abductions, things like that. There's this area in psychedelic research. We've done some of this and are going to publish it soon, looking at entity encounters. Encounters
like angels or
anything,
like
angels, gnomes, whatever the entity is, but having some kind of experience with some perceived other in a psychedelic experience. In this case that I'm talking about specifically with DMT, where you perceive having some kind of autonomous experience with something, whether that's an angel. The descriptors kind of range from being or spirit or angel to all the way to deceased family member or deceased friend to garden gnome, to alien.
Right.
So it's perceived differently to different people and their experiences are different. But those things happen without psychedelics. There's obviously spontaneous experiences of contact with dead relatives that people have, or contact with, aliens that people have described. And so That's something else that's really interesting is are there also going to be similarities in those kinds of experiences between what is accessible with a psychedelic and what is, what people are describing as occurring spontaneously.
Mm-hmm. And I have two more questions. One, can you speak to the co-creation of the mystical and the insight that seems so necessary to this? Because it's not just someone takes a journey and that's it.
Right.
There's the insight that's so important.
Absolutely. And there's a great book by Dr. Bill Miller and Janet DeBaca, or Celeste DeBaca, called Quantum Change. And that book really talks about the co-occurrence of mystical experience and insight experience, and how each in and of themselves might produce benefit. They might produce change, which makes sense, right? Like having either one. But if they happen together, that it might actually be more robust predictor of change. And it seems like in psychedelic studies, and we've started to look at this, empirically more recently, that when these things co-occur, when people are reporting both insight and mystical experiences, that seems to be related to positive outcome. And so there's obviously more work that needs to be done to really definitively say that, these two facets are the facets, the two facets that predict change, but there's certainly two important ones. There might be other things at the neurological level or the physical level. There's a lot of interest by some people in psychedelic research about looking at inflammatory processes, because there's some evidence emerging that psychedelics decrease inflammation. And of course, there's a lot of research in medical science looking at inflammation processes and how that's related to bad mental health. So there's a lot of other things that might be going on, but certainly those two seem to be really powerful mechanisms of helping people with their problems.
And the insightful piece of it is literally processing the experience, right?
Well, it can be both. The insight can come as part of the experience. Some people will report kind of getting a download or getting information in their experience that is new to them. Information about, why they're having the problems they're having, or information about a direction to go in life, or something they need to change. And that can come just spontaneously as part of the psychedelic experience, or it can happen in the psychotherapy that happens after the psychedelic experience. So we spend hours with people after the psychedelic experiences, both in the late afternoon on their session day, as well as the next morning and the weeks to come, where we talk about all of those things. We talk about what did they experience, and we start to do the process of making sense of that and starting to learn how to apply that experience into their life. It's critical. And this is one of the reasons why it's not the case that everyone who takes a psychedelic at Burning Man all of a sudden, all of their problems. Some of them might be, for sure, but the therapy is really critical to this process, at least in my opinion and in my experience on the trials, that, making sense of it and having trained therapists who can help you process it and really capitalize on the behavioral changes that need to occur to support this type of recovery is a very important piece. And of course, insight can come in that stage as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what would you say is now your understanding of consciousness and death as a result of working I do explore death and consciousness. So as a result of working with these patients?
It's a really great question. I think, and I want to make sure I emphasize that. I don't know yet. I don't think empirically.
I think if anybody knew, right? Then, right? This is like the big question mark.
I think that there is something universal that we are tapping into. That there is something that cuts across individual and distinct, and it cuts across our perception of what we think of in our reality about where we are right now and what it means to be alive and what it means to not be alive. I think that we're cutting across these arbitrary definitions with these types of experiences, and we're connecting and experiencing something that is beyond our capacity to understand what it is. And by it, that can be the universe, that can be, a lot of different things. But I think that's what it is. I think that these experiences let us connect into that space beyond our day-to-day separateness of and distance from these experiences. I think they're a lot closer than we actually perceive on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know if that's because it's all inside of us and that we are it and that we are this process. And so by definition, it's with us all the time, but we just don't access it because to access that on a moment-by-moment basis might be overwhelming and terrifying and ecstatic. I don't know if it's in us or if it's outside of us or if it's both, but I do think that these experiences are bringing us closer and into it.
And I think there's so much that we don't understand. And I think because of that, it's hard to put words to even describing what might be, because it just, when people ask me, when you were describing the download situation, that's sometimes when I'm in meditations, I'll get what feels like just a download of information. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that. Everything just gets really super clear for me about kind of next steps, whether it's career or family or whatever it might be. And where was I going with this? And I think when people want to know exactly how that mechanism works, I can't describe it. All I can say is that it feels like I know, and it feels like a knowing that comes from, maybe it comes from within or outside of myself. I can't tell the difference, but it just feels so clear is the only way I can describe it. Yeah. And then people want to know the why behind that, how that happens. And we're all seeking that, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's so difficult to, because it's so difficult to put this into words, because it's so difficult to see beyond our limited capacity of perceiving everything as this or that, or it's separate, or it's not, or it's connected, or it's not. Our brain wants to put everything into a box and put it all into a nice little category. And I think that is actually the opposite of probably what's going on. And I think when you look at other scientific domains like quantum physics and you go in that direction, you realize like actually maybe there's some truth to that. Like maybe what we perceive as separate actually is not separate at all. So these experiences, whether accessed through meditation or psychedelics or other practices, might kind of disentangle that separateness even for an instant, that allows something else to come up in consciousness.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for this insight. How do I sign up? Where can I get in a study somewhere?
Well, I will say just for you and your listeners that if people are interested, it's actually surprisingly hard to get people to volunteer for these studies. I know it's surprising.
I mean, you make it sound so amazing. How could anybody be like? I mean, I don't like the idea of like hands holding me back, but I feel like if it got me, to that next place, it would be pretty.
Yeah. But we have a website, hopkinspsychedelic.org, and we, for any study that we have going on, we will usually both post it on that website, and there'll be information about how people can get involved in research. We also do, from time to time, both at Hopkins and in my new position at Ohio State, we do survey-based studies to have people kind of share their experiences. And we also have a newsletter for the Hopkins clinical trials that people can sign up for, and new studies that come up, which there's always several in development and new ones coming, both for people who have mental health problems and also for people who are what we call healthy volunteers, that we just need people to kind of donate their experience to science so that we can understand what happens when we give these substances to people. People can follow that there, and we'll let people know when and if those studies are opening up. So definitely, if you're interested in these experiences and want to do it in a clinical research setting, then definitely you can find more information there.
Okay. And if people want to find you specifically, where can they find you? And this will all be also on my show notes, but.
Yeah, I think the easiest place to find me would be either through the Hopkins Psychedelic website. My contact information is available there. Also, in my new position, I think in the College of Social Work at Ohio State, people can contact me through there as well.
I'm trying not to boo every time.
I know. Go blue.
I know you. Yeah, exactly. I know we feel the same way.
Yes, my new employer is great, but also go blue.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.